30,000 service personnel descended on Saint-Nazaire from all over France. Everyone was desperate to find a way out before German forces attacked. Before the war, the Lancastria had been a luxury transatlantic cruise liner. In 1940, she was requisitioned as a troop ship. Jonathan is taking Amanda to where her grandfather and thousands of others were queuing up to embark on the 17th of June, 1940.
You can see here British troops crossing the bridge, and the ships were waiting for them down here, the smaller ships, waiting here to take them out to the Lancastria and the others. You can see hundreds and hundreds coming round and getting onto the Highlander, which was a destroyer, which was one of the ships, which is here. And we have these photographs because a member of the crew of the Highlander, who was a very keen amateur photographer called Clements, exchanged a pair of socks for a roll of film in Saint-Nazaire, and he took these photographs. But we don't know how many got onto the Lancastria.
What was the normal capacity?
Well, the normal capacity would have been 2,500. The captain reckoned they could take 4,000.
Yeah.
He was told take as many as arrive, basically. The stewards counted them in with a little clicker, but they were overheard to say we stopped counting when it reached 6,000. And some people think it may have been 8,000 to 9,000 got on the ship.
It was absolutely
so
rammed.
It was absolutely rammed.
Frank Holden was one of the thousands who were taken out to the Lancastria and crammed into the ship's holds and on deck. Finally, the captain decided the ship could take no more. The last load from the destroyer Highlander was turned away.
The ship could have left earlier, but first of all, the French had not wanted it to leave, and then the captain made excuses not to go, not to go. He wanted an escort, he was afraid of submarines, and so on. And it was really a sitting duck.
At 3:43 p.m., the ship's air raid siren began to wail.
And then a German plane dived down onto the Lancastria, unleashed 4 bombs, 3 of which went straight into the holds, 1 of which, according to some accounts, went down the funnel or blew up, and the whole ship turned into an inferno.
Oh, my God.
Many of those who lost their lives were trapped in the holds of the ship.
A lot of people were killed instantly.
Yes.
For instance, the RAF crew who were in, ground crew who were in a hold, they were all blown up. There were fires all over the place. As one man said, if there was a hell, this is it.
This was it.
This is it.
Those who made it onto the upturned hull or struggled in the water were easy targets for the German planes, which machine-gunned survivors. Just 24 minutes after the first bomb hit, the Lancastria sank. The sinking of the Lancastria remains the single worst disaster in Britain's maritime history. More people lost their lives than on the Titanic and Lusitania put together.
I just can't imagine what it was like for Frank and all those thousands of people. I mean, it must have been absolutely terrifying.
76 years later, there is only a small number of survivors still left alive. Along with the military, British families and civilians were also being evacuated. The youngest person aboard the Lancastria was Jacqueline Tanner, who was traveling with her mother and father. She was 2 years old in June 1940.
Hello, I'm Amanda.
Hello, Amanda. I'm Jacqueline.
Lovely to meet you.
And you. And I'm going to take you out to the wreck site.
How exciting.
Where the Lancastria went down.
Wow.
The ship's sonar reveals the first sign of the Lancastria, sitting upright on the seabed below them.
As you can see on the screen, this is the bow of the wreck, and this is the rear. It's 20 meters deep.
So is it lying on its bottom?
Yeah, it's about 10 meters height.
So is this the deck we're looking at?
the
Yeah,
deck?
this part is the first deck.
A buoy marks the spot where the Lancastria sank. Jacqueline's mother and father managed to get into a lifeboat, but it capsized, throwing them and their 2-year-old daughter into the water.
And Mother looked across at my father and said, "What do we do?" And he went, "Swim." And luckily they were both very good swimmers.
Yes.
And they started swimming.
And what about you?
But I was being held, apparently, in my father's teeth.
One of the other survivors wrote an account of how he rescued Jacqueline.
A lifeboat was quite near and I swam towards it. Suddenly, a woman's agonized cry rang out. "Baby here, baby here." Is this your mother?
Yes.
As an echo, I heard the small voice of a child repeating, "Baby, baby."
That's
Oh,
me.
Jacqueline, that's you. I looked over to see a man and a woman swimming along, holding up out of the sea a tiny mite, a little girl, and I realized it was the same woman who had nearly landed on top of me when the lifeboat tipped up. The sight of this man plodding along in grim silence and the mother who cried out only for the safety of her child warmed my heart, and I struggled on beside them. Suddenly, I found a piece of wood. Not a very large piece, but it would do fine to put the baby on, I thought. And swimming over, we pushed it under the baby. She looked quite comfortable, and I now felt that I must get away from those cries of distress, and I swam away. Do you know who that was?
No,
You never knew who that was?
I didn't. No.
But he saved your life.
He did. Well, he helped save the life,
Yes.
and Mother and Father then were 3 hours in the water, and then they were eventually picked up, and we were being transferred to the Highlander, which had a...
So, the Highlander, I have a picture here.
You do.
Because my grandfather, Frank, there he is.
So this is on the Highlander.
This is on the Highlander, and he's covered in oil, like you must have been. And he's wrapped in a blanket. Other people are wrapped in a blanket, and this is the thing that...
Pouring tea.
He's pouring tea, a good old British cup of tea, and he must have been on the same ship as you. He must have been.
On the Highlander.
And he was a lucky one as well. He survived.
"4,000 men, women and children are known to have lost their lives. But the figure is thought to be much higher, as there was no accurate count of the thousands crowded on board the Lancastria.
I think you and my grandfather were extremely lucky to get out of there.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
But the thing I don't really understand, Jacqueline, is that this is a bigger disaster than the Titanic, and yet I've never heard of it.
At the time when this happened, of course, it was too big a disaster to publish. We have here a book. There's a piece on there you might like to read.
Okay. So this is Winston Churchill's
Winston Churchill.
diaries. One frightful incident occurred on the 17th at Saint-Nazaire. The 20,000-ton liner, the Lancastria, with 5,000 men on board, was bombed and set on fire just as she was about to leave. When this news came to me in the quiet cabinet room during the afternoon, I forbade its publication. Here we go. Saying the newspapers have got quite enough disaster for today, at least. I had intended to release the news a few days later, but events crowded upon us so black and so quickly that I forgot to lift the ban. I can see that it was done for morale, for the people in Britain, but now it needs recognition.
Yes, it did need recognition.
There he is.
And there he is.
But isn't it amazing that you
Amazing.
both survived a massive disaster? And
And he was not very old.
He wasn't very old, you were tiny. I just like to think that he may have seen you because it must have been a
Well, he
unique
probably
thing having
did.
a little tot like you on.
It's a small world in some ways, isn't it? It's taken a long time for us to find out that we've got something in common.
HMT Lancastria. Opposite this place lies the wreck of the troop ship Lancastria.
Learning about Frank's story has just been incredible for me. He was a survivor. He was one of the lucky ones from this disaster. And I hope that this story will keep the memory alive of those 4,000 who didn't make it back home. It's odd that I never got to meet him because that goes against what I feel about him now and what I've learnt about him. I think the sad irony is that, you know, my grandfather took his own life in his 70s. He looked after so many mentally ill people, endured so much during the war, but wasn't able to save himself. Maybe all the trauma he witnessed and everybody else's problems were too much for him to bear.